So growing up, I never really had a chance to church shop per se, if y'all know what I mean. I went to St. James growing up down the street. Then I went to college, and if you want to be an Episcopalian at Ole Miss in Oxford, there's really one choice. There's St. Peter's on the square. That's all we got in Oxford. But then I moved to seminary, and if you go to, I was in Alexandria and D.C., and if you want to know anything about moving up to Washington, D.C. for churches, it is basically Episcopal Disneyland. I mean, you can throw a rock and you can hit an Episcopal church on every block. It is awesome. So before Natalie and I got married, I went and picked her up, and it's the first weekend that I moved up there. I'm a seminary nerd. I can't wait to go to church. I pull out my phone. I Google Episcopal churches near me. Search results just spin and spin. 56 churches pop up. 10 of them are walkable. It's great. So I just say, all right, I'm going to go to the top one. It is St. Mark's Capitol Hill. It is located next to the Library of Congress and next to the Capitol building. So we walk up. If you know anything about it, it is a lovely congregation. It was the friendliest church we went to. It is a beautiful place. And they have a unique liturgy. But we walk in, and it's an odd day. The rector was gone, and it's just the end of the summer. So it's very casual. But they did an odd thing. We walk in, and they said, pick your favorite hymn and write it on a piece of paper and put it in a box. So I said, it must be a survey of some sort. So I said, okay, whatever. And so we go through the service, get to the time of the offertory hymn, and they said, okay, they pull this box out. They shake the box. Winning hymn is number 661, Cast Their Nets in Galilee. David, are you okay? Yeah, you're good, okay. Whew. All right, so I know I'm a bad Mississippian, but I did not know the hymn written by William Alexander Percy, Cast Their Nets in Galilee. But my initial introduction to the hymn was just straight shock and awe. The musician played the hymn as just a straight dirge, just super depressing lyrics. I'm not sure if you've ever heard them, but everyone is looking around to figure who chose this hymn. And there was one guy just jamming out to the song. And it is a bizarre experience. But all of this to say, it has a lot to do with our second reading, I promise, from 1 Corinthians today, from Paul, on being fools for Christ, I promise. And I'll read a couple of the lyrics. But what Paul says in our reading today from 1 Corinthians, has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, for God's wisdom is stronger than human strength. So, in the hymn, it introduces our friendly fishermen disciples, which just a few weeks ago I introduced. God had come to the Sea of Galilee, and just unbeknownst, they have never met Jesus, and they threw their nets down and followed him. It's a great story. We've heard this. But the hymn goes a little further and tells the end of their story. So basically the hymn says they were so content. They learned of the peace of God that overflows in their heart that it breaks them. It relates basically the same extent of how the peace of God overflows. It breaks just like their nets break with their fish overflows. It breaks their nets. Here are the lyrics. Young John, this is the third verse, young John, who trimmed the flapping sail, homeless in Patmos died. Peter, who hauled the teeming net, head down was crucified. Okay, so this doesn't sound like peace, does it? Why is this song in our hymnal? And why was that guy at St. Mark's Capitol Hill, jamming out to this dirgy song? But what William Alexander Percy is getting at is a theological point, and I think ultimately his final verse gets at is what Paul is trying to say, is basically how the disciples were forever changed by this true peace of God, that the peace of God, it is no peace, but strife closed in the sod. Yet brothers, pray for but one thing, the marvelous peace of God. So what Percy is trying to say, and Paul affirms, that the peace of this world is in fact no peace at all. The wisdom of this world tells us to seek comfort at all costs, find contentment, stability. We need to get a good job that pays benefits, a picture-perfect family. We need to fall into some sort of box. When you begin to feel anxious, stop. But I love this quote, and I heard it in a TED Talk once, but it's credited to Neil Donald Walsh, and he says, life begins at the edge of your comfort zone. And I'll say that again. Life begins at the edge of your comfort zone. When you feel anxious, that's where your life really begins. For our disciples, they didn't stop fishing. They did stop fishing. They set down their nets because they got nervous, and they knew life is going to begin. It's going to begin now. They met Jesus, and they said, this is where our life really begins. They left those muddy waters. They got out of the boat, and they followed Jesus all the way to the ends of the world. Being fools for Christ made them fools in the eyes of the world. But if Peter and Paul's are fools for God's sake, let me be a fool too. If there were ever a patron saint for fools, or those who are made to look like fools, you can make a case for Paul, surely. However, I feel that he writes about it too much. It's probably the low-hanging fruit. But for me, I think if I had to pick a patron saint for fools, or maybe a patron saint for Lent itself, I'm going to make a case for St. Thomas, Doubting Thomas. I know we get to hear about him later on after Easter, on Low Sunday, but many people won't be here, so I'm making my case now during Lent when it makes the most sense. So I think he's my patron saint for fools, and he should be my patron saint. But he always gets the rap of Doubting Thomas. And I think Thomas is also the first male evangelist. I think the first female evangelist were the women who came to go see the stone rolled away. But Thomas is the first male to say, my Lord and my God, to know that Jesus is fully divine and fully human. Also, despite being the last one to show up in the upper room, being the last one to show up and the last person to get the gossip, which I can fully relate to get the story. I don't know about y'all. But when people eventually tell him, Thomas, Christ is risen, wouldn't you also say, yeah, I need a little bit more here? But let's put ourselves into the shoes of Thomas. You've been on a 3-year journey with your rabbi, who you believe is the Messiah and the Son of God, but during the holy festival of Passover, you witness him arrested, tortured, hung on a cross. You witness Jesus to be totally humiliated. Naturally, you feel empty, hollow. If you've ever felt deeply hurt, emotionally pained, physically, what happens? You draw in, you become insular, you don't trust other people, you lock yourself off from the rest of the world. So for this reason, Thomas says he will not believe until he experiences Jesus in the flesh. So I think it's worth noting that Jesus enters the room. When he does, he enters through a locked door. I don't know if y'all have ever noticed that. It's kind of a funny thing. It's almost like Jesus is a ghost. They're in the upper room, they lock the door, but Jesus comes through anyway. I think it's a pretty good metaphor for Thomas's own heart. He's locked himself off, shut himself off from not wanting to feel pain, yet Jesus comes in anyway. So I think that's a good metaphor for the season we're in. But just as when we shut ourselves off from the rest of the world, Jesus comes anyway. Where once we felt fatalism, Jesus brings peace and hope. And that is just that peace of God that we sing about when we're casting our nets in Galilee. That's because of the resurrection, we no longer have to bear the weight of the world alone. There is hope. that even in the darkest night, the dawn will break in the morning. Just as grace appears when we least expect it or want it to, the heart of Jesus speaks to our weak and fragile heart. As St. John Henry Newman says, this is the moment when heart speaks to heart. For Thomas, his disbelief evaporates, and he is filled with the hope of everlasting peace. Thus, he is able to confidently proclaim, as foolish as it may sound, my Lord and my God. Their anxiety does not evaporate, nor does his life get more comfortable. In fact, just the opposite. As the song goes, John will die in exile in Patmos. Peter dies upside down on a cross in Rome. And what of our saint of fools, Thomas? Legend has it he actually goes east. He goes to China, and eventually Thomas will be martyred in India. Pushed to the limits of his comfort zone, does he settle and become wise? No, he becomes foolish for the sake of Christ. For by our baptism, this call of discipleship will cost us our life, but we will be made new in the life of the risen Lord. While we are fools for Christ's sake, God is glorified. Like Thomas, who was once shut off, once we know the peace of God, we can't help but share the good news. For when heart speaks to heart, we can't help but sing. My brothers and sisters, we Episcopalians are Easter people, which is what makes Lent an even stronger season as we anxiously prepare. Proudly as fools, we proclaim in our liturgy the holy mystery. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. As fools for Christ, this call will take you crazy places as you follow the truth. However, all over the world, people are hungry for hope. People are desperate for an ounce of real truth. As fools for Christ, may we follow in the way of love, that by the way of the cross and resurrection of Jesus, may we proclaim the force of evil are overthrown, without hesitation alongside apostles, martyrs, and saints. With fools like Thomas and Paul, may we cry aloud in a couple weeks, just a few short weeks, that Christ is risen. The Lord is risen indeed. Amen.